to go ahead and dive in. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We are here today to talk with Professor Amy Edmondson about her research and her work, as well as her HBS online course, which is called Dynamic Teaming, and it is a certificate course as well as featured in our CLIMB program, which is the Credential of Leadership, Impact, and Management in Business. Before we dive in with Amy, I just wanted to note that our very first cohort of CLIMB participants recently completed the program back in January. We're thrilled for them for their accomplishment, and I thought it'd be nice to share some words that they shared with us upon completing the program. So I won't read all this, it's a lot, but just thought some quotes might be nice. So Suzanne said, I would recommend this to any leader wanting to further their skill set or leadership skills. Chase said, every module pushed me to grow in ways I didn't expect. Syed said, CLIMB has truly transformed how I view leadership, personal growth, and the importance of strategic decision-making. And it was practical for solving real-world challenges. And then lastly, Emil said, anyone who takes part in it will come away more capable, confident, and ready for future challenges. We're so happy that they had such a wonderful experience and that they are now part of our HBS online community, which spans the globe. And the other thing I want to note just before I dive in is just a couple upcoming deadlines. So if you're interested in applying to CLIMB, the application deadline is this Wednesday for the next session. So the application deadline is Wednesday, March 12th. The session starts April 9th. We also have an info session with our program advising team tomorrow if you're interested in asking more questions or getting some one-on-one feedback or advice on the application or any other questions you may have. And then lastly, any other questions, please visit our website. You can download the brochure. We have a ton of information on the page itself. So that's another great resource for any additional questions. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and dive in to chat with Amy, who is really the star of our show today. This meeting will be recorded, so if you have to drop off for any reason and you want to come back, we will be sending it out. And then I just want to encourage anyone, if you have questions while we're talking, I have a couple to start off, but we would love to hear them. So go ahead and drop those in the Q&A and we will try to get to them. We also have some people answering questions if you have like logistics questions or anything about CLIMB itself versus dynamic teaming. So Amy, I want to introduce our guest today. This is Professor Amy Edmondson. She is the Novartis Professor of Leadership and Management at Harvard Business School and the faculty chair for the CLIMB program. As I mentioned, she developed our dynamic teaming course. I have a few questions, and I thought it would just be nice to start off with a very general one. Can you talk about what is dynamic teaming? I think it's a phrase that was new to me when I first started working on the program, so just kind of an introductory to the concept.
Well, let me back up and say, as a PhD student, I studied with one of the world experts in teams and team effectiveness, Richard Hackman. And in a way, the bottom line, if you will, of decades of research on team effectiveness was get the structures right, and then the teamwork and the outcomes will take care of themselves. And by structures, what Hackman and others meant was get the right people on the team, make sure they have a clear goal, make sure they have the resources they need. But particularly this sort of idea of team composition, the right people. In fact, team was defined as a bounded, stable group of individuals who have shared responsibility for some goal, like a sports team, like many of the teams that you have likely been on. However, many of the teams or teamwork, much of the teamwork that I was studying in hospitals, in tech companies, even in manufacturing companies, were not stable. Right? The composition shifted all the time, depending on what shift you were on, what task you were doing. People were on multiple teams at once. People had to communicate and collaborate with different people at different times, depending on the stage of the project or the nature of the work. And so I thought, wow, I've got to shift my lens from studying teams to studying teaming. So today, teamwork is far more likely to be dynamic, dispersed, shifting over time, putting pressure on, putting the limelight on the skills of effective teamwork rather than the structures of effective teamwork.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think, particularly business is always changing, right? And we've had a couple, big worldwide phenomenons recently. Obviously, the pandemic is still kind of affecting business everywhere today. So that I think that helps set the stage for the rest of our session today. Can you talk about, you said kind of a lot of a lot of people are part of teams now that were different previously. Why is this concept just critical for business today and looking forward to the future of business?
Even before COVID, the teamwork on average was just more fluid. Again, more likely, people are more likely to have, in their jobs to be on multiple teams, not just one, to be primary in some aspect of a project at one point and be secondary in another. So the work is quite simply dynamic. It's changing all the time. And even more specifically, the people with whom you must collaborate or coordinate to ensure high quality output also is shifting over time. And that's, I think the pandemic increase the degree of dispersed teams, people teaming up in different locations. But that was true even before the pandemic. It just accelerated that trend. But the nature of, the speed of change, the nature of technology and tasks and goals and expertise has gotten narrower and narrower over time,
Mhm.
which means that, your particular expertise might be needed by, a handful of different projects. You're no longer as likely to just be, a full-on resource for just one output. So it's I think the workplace in general is more dynamic, more uncertain. You're less likely to have a really clear line of sight on, the next year or two as you were a couple of decades ago.
Mhm. And of course, a hallmark component of the Harvard Business School education is the case study method, and it's something that we've tried really hard to bring into the HBS Online experience. You've worked with so many different companies and doing various cases. Can you talk about kind of why that's important to see those examples in action, and maybe is there one that stands out?
Well, I think of case studies, and as you said, Natalie, we use case studies in our classroom at Harvard Business School, every single day. Almost every class is a case study class. Not all of them. You occasionally have exercises, and the very occasional lecture. But our strong belief is that people learn more from experiential learning, by which I mean you to the best of our ability, we put you in a situation. We say, imagine you're, the CEO of this company and you're facing this difficult decision. How would you respond? And it's, the emotions are high, the experience feels quite energizing, and it's instead of learning theoretical concepts and then having to figure out how might that apply in the real world, we're giving you the real world and then inferring theoretical concepts as a result of the discussion or the journey, right? So here's a real situation, a real person, and you wrestle with it a little bit, and then as the discussion unfolds or as the process on climb unfolds, you're getting more insight into what might work and why, and then we will share some frameworks and concepts and ideas that become far easier to remember and apply because A, you've already applied them, and B, they're memorable because you've been part of a narrative, a story that unfolded in a particular way.
Yeah. Um, I think so. When we opened this webinar for registration, we had people submit questions, and one theme that came through across multiple questions was startups or young companies versus established, mature companies. Are there any significant differences as far as dynamic teaming to be aware of in those two different buckets or similar concepts across them?
Yeah, I'm going to lean into similar concepts across them. Clearly, those are very different contexts, and
Mhm, mhm.
you learn different things, and you are in a sense practicing different skills when you work for a giant global corporation versus a small startup. But at the level of dynamic teaming, the skills you need are essentially the same. But
Mhm.
you need interpersonal skills and managerial skills. And interpersonal skills are that ability to read the room, to understand other people's needs and emotions, to have empathy, to have curiosity, to really be a first-rate listener. those skills are absolutely essential no matter what size, what industry, what context, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And similarly, management skills, which are the skills of planning and coordinating and ensuring that we're looking ahead and figuring out what we need to do by when and how and who needs feedback and who needs a little more motivation or whatever, right?
Yep.
Um, where you are is almost always like if you're unless you're the CEO of Procter and Gamble or some giant company, um, you're running a team. Like you're running a team almost no matter where you are. And the same sort of managerial and interpersonal skills are absolutely necessary, independent of context. And
Mhm.
for that reason, we in Climb, for example, in the dynamic teaming course, we have case studies that range from small tech companies with, dozens of employees to global powerhouses to multi-organizational.
Mhm. International. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you just mentioned interpersonal, managerial skills. If you could give advice to someone who is a younger professional, an aspiring leader, what soft skills would you kind of identify as maybe a couple that they could really work on as they approach their leadership journey?
I've already mentioned it, but I'll lean into listening.
Okay.
That seems, oh yeah, I listen. Yeah, I listen. I'm a good listener. Most of us, most of the time, are not actually listening in a conversation. We're thinking, and it's understandable. It doesn't make us bad people, right? But we're thinking about what we're going to say next. We want it to sound thoughtful and smart and helpful. We care very much what people think of us. So it's only natural and to be thinking about what you want to say, what you want to contribute. Again, that comes from a good place. And most people need to actually learn to listen, right? To
Mhm.
genuinely sort of suspend judgment and say, okay, what am I learning? I like to say you have to choose learning. Like learning isn't automatic. We tend to think it is, but you have to choose to learn. And the only way to choose to learn is you have to sort of explicitly say to yourself, I don't yet know. Like I
Mhm.
don't know the full picture. I have a valid point of view, but I'm missing something. So you need to lean into listening. I'm a huge fan, and we spend a lot of time in the course on inquiry, on the skills. I mean, there
Mhm.
you might not think of it this way, but there are actual skills of asking good questions, questions that are not leading questions, questions that don't that literally leave room for someone to fill in the gaps that you have, that are sufficiently focused on a topic or area, but are phrased in a way that leaves space for people to respond. So
Mhm.
asking good questions is a real skill, and then being attentive to the balance of what Chris Argyris called, one of my mentors, advocacy and inquiry, like the
Mhm.
balance. What's the mix in our conversation of asking questions and then making statements? And
Right.
most conversations don't have enough inquiry. They have too much just people making statements
Mhm.
back and forth, but not necessarily really learning.
Yeah, I can imagine you need to accept that there's more out there that you don't know
Right.
yet.
Hard
So
to
that
learn if you already know.
right.
Right? And I think that many ways, the soft skills, if you will, that I teach and that I lean into are the skills of learning, the skills of
Mhm.
interpersonal learning, not
Mhm.
learning in an interpersonal context. I might be learning, some coding from you, but it's in this interpersonal context. Um, None of us are automatically good at this.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. One thing that I think, just is generally applies to many people in business today, which is a hybrid or remote or in person. There are all kinds of work formats that, as you noted, were becoming more prevalent before the pandemic, are more prevalent now. It's been a topic of conversation for months now. Um, when you think about those kinds of teams where people may be dispersed or not, how do you think about dynamic teaming and inclusion in those different types of settings? And if you're designing teams in those settings, what are some things that you're considering?
Well, I am one of the things in my research and in my teaching that I'm most passionate about is making sure that we don't make a bad decision or ha experience a substantial failure for the following reason. When there was the knowledge or information that we needed to prevent it, but it didn't get raised because people didn't feel that it was safe to speak up, right?
Mhm.
We refer to that in the course of psychological safety, and it's a shared belief that the work environment is safe for all sorts of interpersonal risks, like asking a question, asking for help, admitting a mistake, offering a dissenting view, things that are never comfortable, but if they're understood to be accepted and even welcomed around here, are more likely. That's what we mean by psychological safety.
Mhm.
And one thing that we have learned is that in dispersed teams, or fully remote or hybrid, just on average, psychological safety takes a hit. It's lower. It's not as easy to establish because the threshold for speaking is higher, right? It's
Mhm.
not, it's not, it's not, consider what's happening here. We're not all in the same place. We're not able to read the room. We're not able to kind of sense when there's an opportunity to, speak up and maybe raise a different view. So what that means is there's a whole host of sort of extra tasks and efforts that we need to insert to ensure that we have a real learning environment and real learning processes. So um, you have to be more deliberate. You have to be more
Mhm.
structured
Yeah.
in order to make it work.
Yeah. One thing that I'm seeing a little bit from the QA that's coming in, Marcelo from LinkedIn, and we also got some of these questions in the registration as well. A lot of people are curious about age or generational differences, people working on the same team.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I know that that's obviously been a part
Yeah.
of business forever, but do you have any
True.
thoughts on those age or cultural, or I guess cultural differences kind of related to age?
Yeah,
From
I
all
mean, I
teams.
guess no. I mean, take as a given that
Hmm.
people are coming from different perspectives.
Hmm.
Do not, I mean, this is something I always want to caution against. Do not assume because someone is of a certain age or a certain nationality, they prefer this or they think that, right? Because there is a great deal of variation within groups, within
Hmm.
demographic groups. So even if there might be mean differences, say across cohorts, across age groups, across national groups, in things like psychological safety and various other things we could talk about, there's still a nice dispersion of differences within groups. So you will have overlapping distributions, if you will. So I think it's very important not to make generalizations, but to really, try to understand what's true and what's happening, and to approach all differences, whether they are age or nationality or anything else, with curiosity, with a sort of a genuine appreciation that there's something you may learn from the other group.
Hmm. Hmm.
Now one source of data we've been collecting over the last few years, with respect to sort of dispersed work is, it's beginning to look like a lot of, the new employees, people new to the workforce in particular. So out of university programs and into work, are very much longing for face-to-face contact, right? They want both to meet people and connect and see how things work and understand how organizations work. And they also want mentorship, right? They want to be exposed to, older people like me and see how things, how we think and
Hmm.
react. So there's sort of some differences that we're seeing in preferences, that then shift as people get more into sort of later mid career, maybe live further away, maybe have nicer home offices, what have you,
Hmm.
that lead them to want to stay at home.
Mhm.
But again, I'm never a fan because it always backfires of overgeneralizing by
Right. Right.
any category.
I'm seeing some questions about psychological safety based on a couple questions ago. And the question, like I see one from Jason here, it seems to be the concept very appealing. But for actually putting it into practice, particularly maybe if you need to convince the higher ups that we need to focus on this or a different team, how do you kind of create buy-in to those
Yeah.
concepts?
Well, I'm an old engineer before I became a social psychologist and an organizational behaviorist. So I'm a huge fan of starting with the goal. I have this sort
Mhm.
of in my mind, I'm always asking what works. Now, there's enough robust data that we can say with confidence that psychological safety works for improving decision making, for improving learning, and for improving team performance. Even so, I am not a fan of trying to sell people on the need to build psychological safety. I say,
Mhm.
what is it we're trying to do here? Now, the answer to that question might be we're trying to come up with an innovative new project, or it might be we're trying to delight customers so
Mhm.
that they think our service is fantastic, or it might be we're trying to do continuous improvement in the quality of our service, or patient safety in a healthcare setting, right? Whatever your goal is, start there and then step back and say, okay, what's it going to take, to do a
Mhm.
spectacular job on that goal? Pretty quickly, you're going to realize that what it's going to take is recognition that anyone's voice could matter. Anyone could have a great idea. Anyone could spot a small problem that the others miss. And if they don't feel that speaking up is what we do around here, we're in trouble. So team by team, start with the goal and then reverse engineer what kind of climate must we have to make that happen. Um, Psychological safety in every study I've done is variegated within an organization, meaning if you were to say, oh, for example, what's the level of psychological safety at Harvard? I'd say I can't answer it. I could tell you the mean if I had data from everybody, but the mean is meaningless. Sorry to
Mhm.
fun, but the mean doesn't tell me what I really need to know, which is the local climate. I think the team leader's most important task, and team members too, is to create the best climate for our team so that we can deliver on this challenging work. So don't try to sell psychological safety. Um, Try to sell building the right environment, the right behaviors that we will need to be excellent at our
Mhm.
deliverables.
Yeah, kind of a reframe of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
question.
yep.
All right, let me make sure I'm just getting questions coming in. I think so we covered a lot of them. You talked about, being intentional with team building when if you're dispersed or different circumstances. We talked about psychological safety and how to make that happen. I guess one thing that I do want to make sure we have time for before we close all the questions is we are getting, a lot of interest. There's several hundred people on this webinar. If you are interested in this and you want to go off and learn more after our conversation today, how would you recommend people do that? Obviously, we have our HBS online courses, Climb, Dynamic Teaming, there's a certificate course. You had a book come out last year. Any other recommendations?
Yeah, I mean, I have a book, but just I'll mention The Fearless Organization because it's all about psychological safety and has the sort of evidence you need, plus lots of really wonderful case studies on where it was present and good things happened or absent and some problems that could have been prevented happened. Um, but as you said year and a half ago, I had a book come out called Right Kind of Wrong, and it's really about, you take this theme of uncertainty and dynamism in the workplace, and then you realize pretty quickly we get to the topic of failure. Like things will go wrong, and some of those failures are absolutely essential stepping stones, on the way to progress or innovation. And some of them, alas, are preventable failures. And so it really tries to make the distinction between the kinds of failures that can be, prevented and what are the best practices for doing so, and the kinds of failures that, like it or not, we must learn to love. And if we stay away from those, what I call intelligent failures, right kind of wrong, then
Mhm.
we don't progress in our lives, in our projects, in our companies, right? So these are lessons and practices that are true for your work, but also for your life.
Mhm. Mhm. Um, Okay, wonderful. I'm going to, a lot of the questions are we've already covered, which is great. So I'm just going to take 1 minute to kind of give a brief overview of Climb if this was interesting to you, and then we can let Amy go and I'll stay on if there's any additional questions. But just in case anyone is interested, so Climb, as I mentioned at the beginning, it stands for the Credential of Leadership, Impact, and Management in Business. It is one of our newer programs, but like I mentioned, the first cohort just finished, so it's about a year old at this point. The program includes 4 longer courses. Those courses are in leadership and management, strategy, finance, and an open elective. And that open elective is your selection, any course within the HBS Online portfolio. It also has 3 shorter courses: dynamic teaming, leading in the digital world, and personal branding. And these courses are really focused on skills for business today and in the future. They perhaps were not part of the business school curriculum 20 years ago, 15 years ago, but as we continue to progress, they are critical in business today. So that's the focus of those courses. And then throughout the program, you are interacting with this global cohort. So you're in learning teams, you're meeting new people, you're networking. There's a capstone with activities along the way that culminates in kind of a reflection of all of your learnings and takeaways from the year. And you can, apply everything you learned to Climb to a challenge in your professional life or in your career. Um, so the program is usually offered about 3 times a year. As I said, the current upcoming one is in April. The deadline is this Wednesday to apply. We will get back to you with your admission shortly after, and then hopefully we'll see you in Climb in the spring. And then once you successfully complete the program, you do earn a credential of leadership, impact, and management in business, as well as individual certificates for each of the 4 long courses. So that would be the finance, leadership and management, strategy, and then your open elective. So that is a very brief high-level overview of Climb. Once again, please refer to our website if you have more questions. That's a lot of information: syllabus, timing, info on the format, all sorts of questions can be answered there. We do have this info session with our program advisor tomorrow if you still have more questions. And I think that's it. Amy, any closing words?
Yeah, well, I just saw in the Q&A that Christoph had asked a question that I think is important to answer. I mean, he has 2 questions, one related to the
Mm,
mechanic, but the question he also asked the question is, does dynamic teaming refer mostly to dispersed teams? And the answer is no, not at all. As I said, when I first started noticing that many people in workplaces, in particular, I did some early research in healthcare delivery in hospitals, 24/7, constantly shifting patient mix, different expertise needed at different time. And I would ask people, like, tell me about your team. And they, well, which team? Do you mean sort of, the subspecialty team like cardiology? Do you mean this shift? Do you mean this unit? This unit being, the place where there's a handful of patients that we have to take care of around the clock. Like, oh, I see, right? I asked a bad question, right? So I had to then say, okay, tell me about your work, right? And who do you have to team with when, and who do you have to collaborate with to make sure the patients get the best possible care? Similarly, in a complex, say, drug delivery project and R&D in an R&D setting in pharmaceuticals, um, you're teaming with different people at different times based on the expertise that's needed, what's learned, that then directs a need for different kinds of expertise to come into play here. So the idea of dynamic teaming is it describes the kinds of coordination and collaboration that must happen for excellence without the luxury of stable teams, this lovely group of people that you work with constantly, get to know well, and feel really knowledgeable about who knows what. Like, that's an ideal situation, but it's not that people are lazy and didn't put that in place. It's that the work itself
mm,
let that happen. So we focus on what are the skills, managerial and interpersonal, that you need to thrive in the real world where teaming is more dynamic than it once
Mhm.
was.
Yes, that example is one of the first things you told me about dynamic teaming. I remember, like, if you're going to your family dentist office, for example, you've probably been going to the same dentist. He probably has the same assistants, for example. But if you have a dental emergency, you broke a tooth, you need to go in after hours, is probably a whole different dentist. Maybe that person has a different team, someone's on shift or not. You're still getting dental care, but the teams are very different. One is stable and one is,
Mhm,
could change by the minute. So that I find that
mhm,
example very
mhm.
compelling. Okay, I think we've covered most about everything. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'll stay on for just a minute more in case there's any other climb related questions, but thank you so much, Professor Edmondson.
Thank you. All the best. Bye-bye.
And for anyone who has more questions, I see some links are being put about the info session, which is tomorrow. The application you can reach through our website, which if you click on the apply now, it will take you to create your account and submit your application. It's a short application. It should take 15 to 20 minutes. It's a couple background information like, uh, personal details, name, phone number, etc. And then a couple short answer questions, which are brief, a few sentences. So it should only take 15, 20 minutes tops, if you are interested. Um, and I think that covers most of it. So again, just wanted to say thank you everyone for attending. It was wonderful to speak with Professor Edmondson and to bring this climb curriculum to life a little bit. We're so thrilled about the program and all the people that have gone through it so far, and we hope that you'll be able to join us soon.